Okay, here are your notes for assignment 7, factoring when a is greater than 1. In Delta Math, he does it a little bit differently, and it's a great way to factor. It's actually the way that I factor. If you take pre-cal with Jones next year, it's the way that he factors. This is just a little bit more of a step-by-step method to do it. So if it's helpful for you, awesome. This is called factoring by grouping. So we're going to factor a quadratic if a is anything other than 1, and then find the zeros of that quadratic. So it is far shorter process to factor if the coefficient of the squared term is just a 1. Those are pretty straightforward. That's what we were working on earlier in the week. If it's anything else, though, it's a little bit of a longer process. And so, like I said, in this class, I'm going to show you how to do it by grouping. But if you know how to do it just by kind of guess and check and trying stuff, that's absolutely fine as long as it works for you. So the first thing that I would like to point out is there are times where it looks like you need to use this long process, but you actually don't. So you always want to check to see if there is a GCF or a greatest common factor that you can pull out first. And then sometimes you don't need to go through and do this big grouping way. So you can see in this one, these are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to factor out a 2. From each of these terms, I'm going to pull it out front. So if I divide 2 by 2, I get 1m squared. If I divide -2 by 1, I get -1m. And then -12 divided by 2 is -6. So we're doing the opposite of distributing. If I distributed this 2 back in, I would get the initial trinomial. So now you can see that there's just a coefficient of a 1 here, and now you can do it the same way as you were doing in lesson 6. So I am looking for two numbers that multiply to -6 and add to -1. And those are going to make up my two factors. So they are -3 or -3 and +2. Always double check. Is -3 times 2 -6? Yep. Does -3 plus 2 add to -1? Yes. So we are good. This is the factored form. If we look at this next one, I can't do that same thing because these are not all divisible by 3. So that process will not work for this problem. If that's the case, then we have to do this longer method. So instead of finding two numbers that multiply just to 6, actually, let's list these out first. So remember that if you have it in standard form, which means the squared term first, the term with a 1 as an exponent second, and the constant goes last, then the first number is your A, the second number is B, the third number is C. So in this case, my A is 3, my B is 13, and my C is -10. So instead of just finding a number that multiplies to -10, now I need to find a number that multiplies to A times C. So A is 3, C is -10. 3 times -10 is -30. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to -30. They still have to add to B. They still have to add to 13. So it might take you a few tries going through with your calculator. What goes into 30? It could be 1 and 30, or 2 and 15, or 3 and 10, or 5 and 6. So it might take you a few times to figure out what those two numbers are that add up to 13. Hang on one sec. So two numbers that, first of all, if they multiply to a negative, you know that one of the numbers has to be negative. One of the numbers has to be positive. That's how two numbers multiply to a negative. And because they add to a positive, my larger number has to be the positive. So in this case, it's +15 and -2. Okay. So our first step is that we are going to use these two numbers to split our middle term, to split up our B term. So I'm going to try for this first one to write the directions in here really little. So you have them to refer back to later if that is helpful to you. So instead of just a 13R, I'm going to split that up into a 15R minus 2R. The first term and the last term aren't going to change. So 3R squared. Now not 13, I'm going to do 15R minus 2R. So if we simplified those, we would still get 13. I've just split it apart into 2 steps. And then minus my negative 10 or minus my 10. So you keep the first and the last. You just split the middle one up into 2 terms. The next step is that we are going to group. So I am going to group the first 2 together and the second 2 together. So I did kind of 2 of them on one line right there. Step 3 is that we are going to factor out the greatest common factor from each one of those 2 groups separately. So I'm going to look at this first one. I can take 3 and 15 are both multiples of 3. So I can divide them both by 3. And they both have an R in them. So I can also take an R out of both of them. Once I take out that 3 and the R, what is left in the parentheses? Well, 3 divided by 3 is 1. So I'm not going to write it, but there's a 1 there. I had R to the second. I pulled one of them out, so there's still an R in there. For the second term, 15 divided by 3 is 5. So positive 5. It only had one R, and I pulled it out front. I took that R out front, so there is no longer an R there. I'm going to do the same with the second one. And our goal is to get this to match this. So if there's a negative here, always factor out a negative. So what goes into 2R and 10 is a 2. And I'm always going to take out a negative if there is one. So I'm going to take a negative 2 out. Can't take an R because the 10 doesn't have one. So negative 2 divided by negative 2 is positive 1. I didn't take out the R, so that's going to stay. Negative 10 divided by negative 2 is positive 5. Okay, notice, if these are done correctly, these 2 should always be the same. They should match. They are one of your factors. So this R minus 5 is one factor. The GCFs that you pulled out, this 3R minus 2, make up the other factor. So the second one is 3R minus 2. Okay, so let's try another one. Make sure that it's in order. So the A squared, and then the A, and then the constant. So we're good there. Our A is 2. The B is negative 5. And C is negative 42. So we're going to multiply A and C. 2 times negative 42 is negative 84. So we're going to have to find 2 numbers that multiply to negative 84, and they have to add to negative 5. Since they multiply to a negative, I know that my 2 numbers have to be negative. So 2 numbers that multiply to 84 and add to negative 5. Since 84 is negative, I know that 1 has to be negative, 1 has to be positive. So 84 is 12 times 7. It has to add to a negative. So the larger of the 2 has to be the negative. That means that's the 12. So my first step is that I need to split that negative 5a into minus 12a plus 7a. The first and the last term, we don't do anything to. So I'm going to keep that 2a squared. And I'm going to keep the 42, but let me write these other two first. So I'm going to split that negative 5 into negative 12a plus 7a. Notice they still add to negative 5. And if you flip these around, it will still work. You're still going to get the same thing. Okay? And then we're going to bring our last term straight down. So I'm going to bring down that minus 42. The next step is to group them. So we always group these first two together and those second two together. And then look for a GCF in each one to factor out. So 2 and 12 are both divisible by 2, and they both have an a, so I can factor an a out of both of them. Here, I took out the 2, I took out one of the a's, so I still have an a left, and negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. The a is gone because I factored it out. In the second group, 7 and 42 are divisible by 7. This one's a positive, so I'm going to take out a positive 7. And then what do we have left? I took out the 7, so I'm just left with the a. Negative 42 divided by 7 is negative 6. So these two match. That's good. That means that they make up one of the factors. Oops, minus. The GCFs that I took out, the 2a plus 7 makes up the second factor. So now might be a good time for you to pause and see how far you can get in one. So press pause on the video and try this one and see how far you get before you need to come back and press play. One thing to notice is that this one is not in standard form yet. So you need to rearrange it before you can identify A, B, and C. So I'm going to write it as 2x squared minus 5x minus 12. Okay, so my A is 2. My B is negative 5. And my C is negative 12. I need two numbers that multiply to 2 times negative 12 is negative 24. And they have to add to B, which is negative 5. So two numbers that multiply to negative 24 and add to negative 5 are negative 8 and 3. So I'm going to use those two to split this middle term, negative 8x plus 3x. The first term and the last term don't change. We're going to bring them straight down. Excuse me. Okay. After you've split, now we group. So we group 2 together and second 2 together so that we can find the GCF of each one. So 2 and 8 are divisible by 2, and they both have an x. So I can factor out an x. I took out the 2. I took out one of the x's. So I still have one x left for that first spot. And the second one, negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. And the x is gone because I factored an x out. In the second group, 3 and 12 are both divisible by 3. And since it's positive, so 3 and 12 are both divisible by 3. Since it's positive, I'm going to factor out a positive 3. So I've taken the 3 out. I still have an x. Negative 12 divided by 3 is negative 4. So these two match. They make up one factor. And my GCFs, 2x plus 3, make up the other factor. Okay, so now we're going to add another piece on, and that's actually solving it. So you're going to go through and do the same thing that we just did where we factor, but then we're going to go a step further and actually solve for x. So it starts out the same. we want to make sure that it is in the correct form. So to solve quadratics, you need it set equal to 0. So I'm going to take this 2x and move it to the other side by subtracting and by subtracting. So I get 2x squared plus x minus 3 is equal to 0. So this will not work if it's not equal to 0. You got to get that first. Now my a is 2, my b is 1, and my c is negative 3. So I need to find two numbers that multiply 2. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. And add up to my b, add up to 1. So those two numbers are 3 and negative 2. Okay, so we're going to split the middle term into 3x minus 2x. So remember that 3x minus 2x is still the same as 1x. I've just split it apart. The first term doesn't change, and the third term doesn't change. Okay, so just keep bringing down that 0. We're not doing anything with it quite yet. We're going to group first 2 together, second 2 together, and factor out our greatest common factors. Nothing goes into 2 and 3, so I can't factor a number out. They do each have an x, so I can factor out 1x. So 2 divided by 1 is still 2. I took one of the x's out. 3 divided by 1 is 3, and I took the x out. In the second one, nothing again goes into 2 or 3. I have to take out something. You always have to take out something because you need another number. So even if it's just a 1, in this case it's a negative, so I'm going to factor out a negative 1. So then I have positive 2x plus 3 equals 0. And then we're going to write our two factors. So 2x plus 3's, those match. That makes one factor. And then my GCFs make up the second one, so x minus 1. Now that you have it factored on the left and equal to 0, the last step is the same as it was Tuesday or Wednesday, whichever day you have class, is to take each one of those two and set them equal to 0. So I'm going to take this 2x plus 3 and set it equal to 0 so that I can solve for x. So that's one of the zeros. And then I'm going to do the same with the other one. X minus 1, set it equal to 0, and solve that one for x. So I get positive 1. So here would be another great time. Pause the video. We're almost 20 minutes in anyway. I know you're losing patience. So pause the video and see if you can do this last one. So again, it's not, it is in standard form in the sense that they're in order, but it's not equal to 0. So I'm going to move this 6 over. So my A is 5, B is 22, and C is 8. I need two numbers that multiply to 5 times 8, which is 40. And they have to add to my B, which is 22. So two numbers that multiply to 40, add to 22 are 2 and 20. So we split that middle into 2x plus 20x. First term comes straight down, and the last term comes straight down. Okay. Next step is grouping. So 2 and 2. So we can factor out the GCFs. Nothing goes into 5 and 2, right? Nothing but 1. So 1, but I can take an x out of both of them. 1x. So now I have 5x plus 2. 20 and 8 are both divisible by 4. Since it's a positive, I'm going to take out a positive 4. So I get 5x plus 8 divided by 4 is 2. So my factors are 5x plus 2 and the GCF's x plus 4. So then we're going to set each one of those factors equal to 0. So I'm going to set 5x plus 2 equal to 0 to solve for that x. So that gives me one of them. And then I'm going to set the other factor, the x plus 4, equal to 0, and solve to find the second x. So we get -4 for the second one.